Yes. So let me introduce you to our next speaker. I'm very impressed. I'm sorry, I'm going to be quite nervous. He's the one I've been trying to talk for the last 10 years. So now I'm getting it. Thank you, ChangeNOW. So David Linde is CEO of Participant. In a nutshell, Participant has been behind all the movies that have changed our view on the media landscape, with Spotlight, with someone dear to my heart, Edward Snowden with Citizen4, The Climate with Inconvenient Truth. They are the production and the distribution engine with these masterpieces who has showcased that film can change the story of society. David Linde is a tycoon. He's a Hollywood superstar. He has been a producer for all of his career, behind big production and big filmmakers like Sofia Coppola, Pedro Almodovar, Spielberg, etc., etc. Needless to say, I'm a little bit nervous. I hope he's here. Yes, no, please, wave to me.
I can see you.
Hey, hello.
Hey there.
Where do I look at?
Hi.
Here. Welcome, welcome. Thank you for being here. I know it's very early. We had a wonderful session beforehand where we tried to place the context of production and distribution. But first of all, David, can you frame a little bit better than me what Participant is today?
Sure. Thank you, first of all, and thank you for that introduction. If you're nervous now, I'm nervous.
Okay.
So,
I thought you were not listening.
Really, it was very kind. And also, I just want to, thanks to ChangeNOW for having me. I'm quite excited, and I was just listening to your previous panel, which was really fascinating and interesting and very worthwhile. So, big thanks to everybody who invited me and is welcoming me today. But so Participant was created about 20 years ago, almost exactly, by a gentleman named Jeff Skoll, who's the founder and the owner of the company. And Jeff believes very strongly in the power of storytelling and the unique power of storytelling to really elevate the most important conversations about what the world is facing at any one time, and especially today, for sure. And so we've been around for about 20 years, and we'd like to think of ourselves as a partnership company, I think is a good way of describing it, which is, and what I mean by that is that we're in trying to harness the power of what everybody I think in the room is thinking about it and doing requires being partners with, for us, an interesting group of different organizations and individuals who are not used to working together. So we try to work with the greatest artists in the world, from around the world. It's while impact and the impact of a movie or a television series comes in many, many different ways, distribution appropriate distribution is really, really important. And we like to say that, even though there are millions of different ways that people can see something, if nobody sees it, then there is no impact. So we partner with distributors around the world who we've actually worked with for decades now, often, in sort of creating the reach and the awareness and the connection that's so vital to the films that we make. And last but not least, and I think what used to make us unique, but now, you saw with Water Bear today, now a lot of people do the third type of partnership, which is really, we work with NGOs and foundations and nonprofits who are doing what we like to call they're the boots on the ground. They're the ones who are really working to affect the kind of change that we're trying to bring to light with our films. But the thing is that artists and distributors have unique, complicated relationships, and impact partners are not typically used to working with artists nor with distributors. And so we like to think of ourselves as sort of a trust accelerator, not just a partnership company, but a trust accelerator, where in our work, we're bringing these three different types of partners together in a unique way that allows the film to help accelerate the kind of change that all of us are seeking to accomplish with what it is that we make. And that's the fourth act, right? That's the fourth act of our films and our series, is people seeing it and being inspired, as the artist intended, being inspired to actually engage in the important work that's facing all of us. So that's Participant.
Very good, thank you. I understand that you had a big career because before that, producing many masterpieces, working with the biggest. Why did you suddenly, or maybe not that suddenly, decided to change and to go into that field of making change through film? Why is it that you went into that direction, you yourself?
Well, I think for two reasons, right? The one was practical, right? Is before I came to Participant, I was running my own production company. I had left the studio system and was really enjoying myself running a production company. And my primary investor, who had invested in a lot of Hollywood, decided to exit the business. And so I was looking for a new investor. And so I was actually beginning to talk to people about, what would be an appropriate new structure for my company. And that's when Jeff School called me. And we spent a lot of time talking, why would I be the appropriate person to run this particular company, especially with my background? And what I told him at the time was because I was incredibly fortunate to be raised by two parents. My father was a German Jewish, I'm actually adopted. My father was a German Jewish refugee, and my mom grew up in a small fishing town in Oregon on the west coast of the United States. And for my parents, culture was incredibly important. And they really, having both faced real challenges when they were younger, they felt it was of paramount importance that if you were to really make a contribution, that you understood culture. And I was incredibly lucky in that I traveled a lot when I was a kid. I lived in Europe for several years. At one point I spoke 4 different languages. I don't anymore. And I just felt like when Jeff offered me the job, that this was sort of my opportunity to take all my experience, but also invest in the power of culture and invest in what it is that we and so many other people do. And it just felt like an incredibly unique opportunity that I could take advantage of what I had learned in my career and the experience that I had developed to help move Participant ahead. And so it was great. And that was 8.5 years ago. So.
Okay. So that was 8.5 years ago. Can you give us some of the lessons you learned at Participant about social changes and films? What is it that works and what does not work? If there's any recipe.
Well, I think that, in the previous panel, that somebody was mentioning the challenges of distribution these days, especially around documentaries. And I think that, we live in an evolving ecosystem, right? Where right now, the massive transition in the way that people consume films and series is having a very, very serious effect on creators, right? And this sort of, as companies begin to find their business strategy, that they're, as these big media companies that really control a lot of distribution, find themselves really figuring it out, I think, and really discovering where their strengths lie. Is we as creators have to be constantly thinking about that. We have to be constantly thinking about how the world is transitioning around us. And one of the things that we talk about most recently at Participant is elevating conversations. And that artists, especially, and filmmakers and producers, right now elevating, being in making something, right, trying to be as focused on elevating a conversation as opposed to being part of a conversation. And I think what audiences right now really, really want is they do want to be part of a conversation. And we've seen that in our work. But they're really looking at a moment of huge division around the world for the opportunity to experience something that actually takes them to a different place, you know, and that can be in experiencing the movie or the series, you know, and how you have an individual response, but it's also talking about it, right? It's also walking out and being able to have a conversation that movies really provide people that others that we're lacking, I think, in a big way. And when we were talking the other day, and I was just reminded by the gentleman from Arte when he was talking about the division and what we call sort of the perceived partisan nature of content creation. And I don't really like content, by the way, the word content. But a friend of mine said something to me the other day who works in the impact space. She's a big advocate, and that for the first time in her career, she walks out of her house and she looks around and she knows that 50% of the people that she sees don't agree with the work that she does, right? Just by definition. And much more importantly, can no longer be convinced otherwise by facts. So how do you engage people in a world where that kind of division exists? And I think it's the shared experience, right? I think it's the shared experience of seeing a film or a series, or for that matter, you know, a video on TikTok, quite honestly. And those are the kinds of things that we're really thinking about these days. So.
And in that context, as a producer and distributor, how do you pick a subject? How do you pick an adventure? How do you embark that?
Wow, not that differently from other producers, right? You know, personally, I've always gravitated towards directors. I've spent a lot of my time working with a lot of different directors, and I enjoy the perspective of the filmmaker. I believe in the perspective of the filmmaker. I'm willing to take that bet. And a participant, of course, it's not, you know, that's sort of my perspective as an executive and as a sometime producer. But I think from participants' standpoint, you know, what we try to do is, you know, it's not that huge of a company and our resources are finite and somewhat limited. But we're really looking, we try to cover as many bases as possible. We are looking as a company, we're very focused on the environment. We're very, very focused on health and tolerance and human rights. We believe institutional social responsibility, you know, is a version of storytelling that is very dynamic. Social and economic equity is really, really important to us, as is peace and security. And these are kind of the areas that we try to think about in terms of what it is that we can accomplish. But we're looking for, you know, not to be repetitive, we're looking for original stories that really give people the opportunity to, you know, not to be repetitive, but elevate their conversation and use the film to do that. And it's a lot of work, right? You're a filmmaker yourself, right? You know what it's like. It's just a ton of work, but really, really quite valuable.
And where do you see the industry of film going, given what we shared a little bit in our discussion, but in the previous discussion with the upcoming of, well, the change imposed by artificial intelligence, but also the platforms, etc. Where is it that we can act, and where do you see the industry going and your role going? On top of,
well, I'm not sure where. I'm a pretty optimistic person. I try to be an optimistic person. I think it's really important right now. But I certainly don't have the answers, other than to say that I don't think that we're going to see the answers for the next couple of years. I do think that we're going to see a lot of transition in the way that people consume media and consume stories. And as I've always said, that as a producer, the best producers, in my experience, that I've worked with, are the ones who live the entire life of the story, right? From the development through the financing, through the production, and through the distribution and the marketing of a film or a series. And I think that that's our responsibility as people who are involved in the creation business. It's our responsibility to understand where the marketplace, so to speak, is at any one moment, and to try to integrate what it is that we do and what we know in the most productive way possible. And that's super hard, right? I say that, right? And it's like, whoa, wish I could just snap my fingers, and none of us can. But I do think that's our responsibility, and I do see some really positive things going on. And I'm going to use two examples. One of which is we made a movie directed by Chiwetel Ejiofor about 5 or 6 years ago called The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind, which we sold to Netflix for distribution. So it came out about 5 years ago. And now that Netflix is publishing their results, they recently published the views of the top 500 titles or something like that in the first half of 2023. So in the first half of 2023, 5 years after the film originally came out, 5 million people watched The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind on Netflix, 5 years after it came out, right? That kind of reach of a story is phenomenal, right? And we look at streaming as something, obviously, we want to protect ourselves and protect the artists that we work with. But the reach that you suddenly have through streaming is really exciting. And we spend a great deal of time working with our distribution partners to make sure that the opportunity is maximized. And then, we have a little TikTok presence around at Participant, which is really focused around bringing awareness around both the projects that are being released, but also the work that we're doing around what we call our impact campaigns. And it's not a huge presence, right? But it's not unusual for us to put up a TikTok that relates to a movie and very, very quickly get 1 million views, right? And by the way, I'm as concerned about AI and what TikTok really means as anybody else. I'm not naive about that. But getting 1 million people very, very quickly to be aware of your work is something to be taken advantage of, I think, and something to be taken very seriously. So do I think that we're going to have real definition over the course of the next couple of years about where the industry is going? I don't. Do I think that we're going to see a lot of changes that we all have to be paying very, very close attention to? As I know everybody, that's why we're all here, right? Having this conversation, or one of the reasons we're all here. But I try to be optimistic.
Okay, last question. How do you measure your impact, the impact of a film?
Well, we've been doing this for 20 years, and a couple years ago, we went back and looked at all the work that we've been doing, and also talked to a bunch of people who work in consulting for philanthropies and foundations, because, measuring the impact of what, for instance, a foundation does is important because they need to ascribe some version of a value to the investments that they make towards positive social change. And so we try, before we greenlight something, we think about 6 different areas where we think change can be achieved. So the first 2 are for everything, right? So the first is what we call title, reach, and quality. How many people saw it, right? And the second is media coverage and engagement. So that's, newspaper articles, news coverage, television coverage, social media engagement, things like that. And, that should be measurable for anything that's made, right? And so those are sort of the first two. And then the others we've broken down into 4 categories. The first is growing organizations and communities. We often find that in our impact campaigns that a lot of what we find ourselves doing is helping create capacity for especially smaller nonprofits who are doing this amazing work. The fourth category is changing minds, and changing people's perspectives around the world that they see, which speaks to the shared experience that I was talking about earlier. The fifth is changing institutions, and that also falls under things like legislative change, which can be a very, very film especially can be a very, very powerful way of accelerating institutional change, especially around legislative change. And the last is changing behaviors. And when I say changing behaviors, we're about to release next month a sequel to a documentary we made called Fooding, Fooding 2. And that's a perfect example of changing behaviors, right? Where literally you can go on to YouTube and you can literally see how people are talking about how the movie affected them and changed the way that they live their lives. So those are the 6, and it's impossible to apply all 4. You certainly have to apply the first 2, and we have tried to, when we decide to make something, identify where we see the opportunity for change, which then allows us to start thinking about the partners that we're ultimately going to work with when the project is finished and is ready to be seen.
Okay, thank you very much. I added 5 minutes to this conversation. Sorry for everybody,
sorry
but
about
that was so interesting for me. Sorry. Thank you very much, David.
My apologies.
Thank you.
Thank
you,
you,
everyone. Hope you enjoy it. Up to the next section. Bye.
Okay. Take care.